some of the most effective speech and language therapy is parent interaction therapy, where the speech therapist will sort of coach and guide the parent to change their communication style. And the only homework that parents will have to do is questions can be really hard for children to process, especially if they're struggling with language.
Behaviour is communication. So if that child is presenting with behaviour, how do you think, why is that? What is happening before that? What's triggering that? What are they trying to let you know?
Hi, I'm Chris Robsole and welcome to School Talk, the podcast where we have meaningful conversations about education, learning, and those issues that matter most to students, to parents, and to teachers. With over 10 years experience in international schools, I've seen firsthand the challenges, but also the opportunities in learning today. Each week, I'll sit down with inspiring guests to share stories, insights, and strategies on how we can help shape the future of education. Whether you're here to grow, to learn, or to spark change, this is the place for you. So let's get started. Okay, welcome back to another episode of School Talk. This week, I'm joined by Chloe Smith, a pediatric speech and therapist from Attic. So first of all, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me.
And today we're going to talk about what a speech therapist does, kind of what you do in your role here, and we'll just flow from there. So kick us off. Who are you and what is a speech therapist?
So I'm Chloe, and speech and language therapy supports all children in terms of speech, language and communication difficulties. And they also cover eating, drinking and swallowing as well, which is kind of a different section. They also cover that sort of wide range of needs. We can sort of say speech and language. So it covers speech, which is like the articulation and pronunciation of words. Language is more sort of the grammar, vocabulary, semantics, and then communication. So all of that social communication, attention, listening, all of those things that go into that as well.
Okay, interesting. And there's just so much to unpack there. So what would you say for you is one of the biggest challenges that kids face with that language development?
All children have strengths and weaknesses. So like me, I naturally find maths a lot easier than English. And some children do just find learning languages easier than other children. So some children do just need a bit of support developing their language to hit their milestones. And then some children have maybe difficulties that would warrant like a diagnosis as well. So maybe some children have developmental language disorder, which is when they're find maybe their learning their grammar tricky, because English is a really tricky language. So lots of irregular verbs and things like that. And then also social communication disorders like autism spectrum disorder and things like that. So it's a wide spectrum. It's hard to say what's common. But yeah, I think some children just naturally find it more tricky.
Yeah. And then as a parent and a teacher, I suppose, how can one, you spot those difficulties, and two, how do you support those difficulties?
So I think it's looking at sort of ages and stages. Speech and language therapy, I think it's like .org.uk, have a really nice website on like checking the ages and stages for language development and using them sort of with a bit of a pinch of salt as well.
Sure.
Not sticking strict guidelines, counting how many words your child's saying, but just keeping it in mind. And also thinking about how are they doing with social things as well. So how do they play with other children? How do they deal in different environments? It might be that they're really comfortable at home, but then school or nursery are reporting that they're finding things a bit more tricky. So thinking about those sort of things. And I think the best way to support children with language development is, it sounds so simple, but just talking to them. There was a new study in 2024 that said some of the most effective speech and language therapy is parent interaction therapy, where the speech therapist will sort of coach and guide the parent to change their communication style. And the only homework that parents will have to do is spend 15 minutes a day just playing and talking with their child. And that makes a huge amount of difference.
Yeah, I bet that's hard to hear from a parent perspective, that you potentially don't. Is it not speaking to your child enough or not speaking to them in the right way?
I think it can be a bit of both. And I think actually it's okay that parents aren't communication experts. Like I have a master's degree, so of course I'm going to know these things. And parents have got such busy lives as well. A lot of parents are both working full time. There's multiple children. You know, I think it's hard. It's easy to be hard on yourself.
Yeah.
So actually, I think it's being kind to yourself in the way that actually life's really, really busy. And again, it's not the parents' fault if their child is struggling with language. It's actually that their child needs something a little bit different. And again, you might have your first child pick up language super, super easy. And then your other child, just because all children are different, they find it a bit more tricky. So it's just adjusting to that really more than anything.
And I guess you wouldn't initially go straight to kind of seek your services. You'd do things at home. As a parent, the best thing to do is just to try and engage in conversation and just develop talking to them and listening to them and things like that.
Yeah. I think the key for that is being really child-led with it as well. I think a lot of the time when, as adults, we're anxious or we want to know about what the children's thinking, you ask a lot of questions. You'll say, oh, what's this? What have you done? And actually questions can be really hard for children to process, especially if they're struggling with language.
Yeah.
If I hold up something and I say, what's this? If they don't know what that word is, it's going to be really hard for them to learn that word. But if you hold up something and you label it and you name it and you talk about it, it's much easier for them to learn and sort of like sponge in that language, I guess.
Yeah.
So again, just letting the child find their interest, enjoy what they're enjoying, and you can kind of come in with that and, label things, comment on things, and just have fun with it.
Well, I guess it's the same as an adult. If you don't know something, you automatically shut down, don't you?
Yeah.
You feel that pressure.
Yeah.
So why would it be any different? Yeah. We spoke before about, before we went on camera, who knows, about who you work with. So in terms of, you work more as in a clinic and not in a school. So from a school perspective, we would recommend that kids go to speech and language therapy. Someone would come in, but people now, where the clinic you're at, will come directly to you because they've thought there's a need for that. So tell us about some of the work you do within your clinic.
So again, I see children of all ages. So it might be, a 2.5-year-old who's not necessarily saying anything at the minute. They're finding transitions really difficult. Parents will often say, don't listen to me. They're not responding to their name. Or I'll have maybe a 5 or 6-year-old who hasn't got their S sound quite right. And it's impacting the people aren't understanding them and things like that. Or it might be, an older child, 12 or 13, they have a diagnosis of autism, let's say, and they're sort of wanting to know a little bit more about that and understand how that impacts them and things like that. So I see a really broad range. I think a lot of the time schools will recommend to parents to come into speech therapy, and that's why they come to us a lot of the time. But also as well, I think speech and language therapy and communication is more known now. So parents of themselves, I would see it a lot on social media and things, will come and find us directly as well.
Yeah. And then they would come for a one-off session, or you kind of give them homework, like I said before, ongoing. How does it look?
I think it looks different for every child. And I think that's really important as well, that it is really led by the family and by that child's specific needs. So if you speak to other parents and you're doing the exact same thing as somebody else doing speech therapy, that would be a concern to me. It should be really individualized. So I would always have like an initial consultation with the parent, get a really nice communication history. And what I'm looking for as well is the impact of that communication difficulty. So how is it affecting their sort of well-being, their daily life? What is it stopping them from doing and things? And then I'll have a think about that as a target specifically. We'll have an assessment. It might be formal, it might be informal. It might look a lot like just I'm sitting on the floor and playing. But I promise I am doing some assessment in the background, and then I'll sort of write a therapy plan for after then. And some therapy recommends like see me twice a week, some every week, some every other week. So it really just does depend on the need. Well, so
And diagnosis. So if you give a child a diagnosis with speech and language, sometimes from a teacher perspective, parents aren't that forthcoming with it. Talk to us a bit about that. Why do you think that might be? Problems that it can have? What do you think?
I think it's really tricky, isn't it? Because it really just depends on like the parent's relationship with the teacher and everything like that. A lot of the time, if we give a diagnosis, I will always recommend school no.
Coming from a teacher's perspective, you probably already know that there's something going on. I think sometimes parents are reluctant because there's a lot of stigma. And I think some parents, when they receive diagnosis, it takes time for them to process that. they might be in denial. Again, that's okay as well. But I think it's working through that. And I think a lot of times parents are worried that I always hear from parents that they're worried attending school, their child then gets put in a box or labeled, and they'll say, okay, you have the autism diagnosis. This is XYZ is what happens. When in reality, it's
More individualized than that. So I think sometimes it's about parents' understanding of how schools work.
Yeah.
But also I think a lot of the like stigma and fear of what then happens after that as well.
Yeah. I think, from teaching perspective, it's all you want to know, because then you can help them even more.
Yeah.
Kind of if you withhold that information, it becomes tricky to think, okay, what could I do? What are you doing? If I don't know that a kid's having a session with you, then I might be doing something different that doesn't kind of go against it. It doesn't complement it as well. So,
And I think, coming from the UK, having diagnosis is really helpful for things like funding. But I know that I've heard even in private schools in the UK and here, parents are worried about their child's place because of the diagnosis as well. So I think sometimes there's a bit of like a misunderstanding of how schools react to those diagnoses and things like that.
I think with the places as well, if a child, again, going back to kind of when I was teaching, if you have a class with too many needs in that class, school probably wouldn't say no, but they might assign you to a different class, and because then it just becomes, you wouldn't get the amount of care and attention that you might deserve having that need. So it's definitely in your best interest.
Absolutely. I think as well, teachers will probably already know there's a need. They've already put things in place as well, definitely. And I think as well, it helps, again, like you were saying about putting children in the right class, the right learners, just help balance that learning environment as well, and give schools a reason to do that as well, which can be helpful.
In terms of the ages of kids you work with, do you have a favorite age?
I really like the early years. I just feel like communication always starts from those really early years, and I just really feel like I see the most change. It's really meaningful. It's also such fun. A lot of the time, I'm like on the floor with bubbles, trains, loads of sensory toys, singing nursery rhymes.
The language growth, one of my daughters is 2, and I feel like every morning she's learned new words.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and just becomes that little bit more articulate.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
It's called the language explosion, like that age. And I feel like a lot of the times, like this is the sort of age where parents are a bit worried. Sometimes children will stammer at this age, but that's really normal. Just because there's so much going on in their brains, and they're doing everything for the first time, which is again like another reason why I really love this age, because it's just exciting.
Definitely, yeah. So my daughter's 2, but we've got a family friend whose daughter's 3, but mother is Portuguese, father is English. So they're speaking in 2 languages at home. And when you ask her a question, she delays slightly. And at the moment, she'll speak kind of half it in English, half it in Portuguese.
Yeah.
So how does, especially being here, bilingual effect impact language?
Yeah. So I think it's important to start to say there's different types of bilingualism. So like a child like that has maybe learned 2 or 3 languages at the same time growing up. It might be that children are bilingual, but they've learned one language first, and then they learn another language second. So a lot of the time, maybe they've learned a home language first, and then they learn English when they go to school. So that's really common. And the type of bilingualism can change how that impacts the child. So just to say, bilingualism doesn't cause language difficulty, it doesn't cause language delays. Always speak to your child in the language you're most confident in. But some children, if they learn a second language after a home language, they can go through like a silent period. Really, really typical, is expected, because I think if you're suddenly in a new environment with a new language, you will go quieter because you're spongy in all of that information. And again, as a speech therapist, I won't see a child for speech therapy if they're sort of like 3 to 6 months in a new language. Just because, again, it's taking so much time to process all of that information.
Knowing that kids are moved from wherever to Dubai and expected to learn English, we're really confident in their old school and get moved to a new school, and they're just like, and you had to say to the parents, just be patient.
Yeah.
They're just going to listen and take it all in and copy and all of that.
And I think it's really important that you do speak your home languages. It's really important for that child's sort of like sense of self, identity, speaking to family members. And And, if your child is bilingual and has language difficulties, the language difficulties would have always been there, just because of the way their brain's working. It's not because of the bilingualism. Lots of children have diagnosis or language difficulties and speak multiple languages really well. So I think it's just important that that's the take home, is that your most confident language is the best model for your child. And some children, again, might speak half a sentence in one language and half a sentence in another language. So I think it's really, really common. And again, it's about processing, okay, which language do I pick from this person and which language do I pick from that person? And children are learning that. It's just you can see the cogs turning a little bit, but completely normal is that.
Because I only speak English,
Mm.
but you speak to people who speak multiple languages and they say, oh, I still think in French.
Yeah.
Whereas I can't even comprehend that. So I'm like, what language do you think it? So yeah. Would you say there's a better way to learn a language in terms of learn one first and then do another one, or the multiple at the same time growing up?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think, obviously, wouldn't hold off a language if you're worried about giving the child too much. Children, especially at that young age, can sponge in everything.
Yeah.
So take advantage of that almost, and as many languages as possible, or is natural to your home environment.
Yeah.
Say like I wouldn't hold anything back to wait for your child to master one language before the other. They can manage two, sometimes three.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. Just whatever happens naturally, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said your favorite to work with is the younger one. 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, they come to you. What kind of challenges are they facing?
A lot of the time it's like stammering, or maybe some social communication. Maybe they have like a diagnosis of developmental language disorder, DLD, from before, or maybe it's new, and they're it's really impacting them academically with all of those new, like, very complex vocabulary and tricky like concepts as well. I think a lot of the time, when I was based in secondary schools and stuff, it was children with like behavior. So maybe they've got some challenging behavior, and it's because they're really struggling in school. You have to understand what people are saying, and then there's behavior there as well. So a lot of the time, children who you see having that challenging behavior, they might need to see a speech and language therapist.
Yeah.
And there might be an underlying language needs that was never picked up.
Yeah.
It's quite common.
Yeah. Okay. And I suppose they would feel even more anxious, I suppose, than the 2-3-year-old who doesn't really understand that they're stammering and stuff. But I guess as you get older, it becomes a lot more evident to yourself, to your peers, things like that.
Yeah, there's all of that social pressure and things like that. Yeah. I used to work, the team I used to work in was part of the youth offending service in South London as well. And I think there's like a statistic out there, I might be wrong, but I think it's something like 60% of children in the youth offending service have some sort of speech and language need, which is huge. It's a huge number. I think it's something like that. But yeah, it's definitely on half.
Yeah. I know this is not exactly it, but my wife and I often say no one's a dick for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something else going on. And whether that be something that they're stressed about, or like this case, who can't communicate effectively, there needs to be help and support that best you can. So
We always say, that speech and language therapists, we always say like behavior is communication. So if that child is like presenting with behavior, have to think, why is that? What is happening before that? What's triggering that? What are they trying to let you know? And often that supports that.
yeah.
Thinking back.
And in terms of strategies, the best thing, I know you said earlier about labeling things, being really clear and concise with things. Any other strategies that parents could use or teachers could use?
I think one thing I find really helpful, that I always keep in my head, is like the hand strategy. So for every one question I ask, I will label and comment 4 times. So I find that really helpful, like, because people always get hand to you. So when you're playing and stuff or you're teaching, you can always think of those things, because then you're modeling, the labeling, you're commenting, you're expanding language, and then you're also sort of assessing and pushing that further with that one question as well. I think for teachers, a big thing is visuals as well. I think we always think about expression, like even now we've been talking about expression, but there's also the other side of communication, which is understanding. And there's always new concepts and always new teaching in the classroom. And I think visuals are such a really important tool to use to help children understand those new concepts. And you can take those visuals away to sort of step it up as well. But I think introducing new things, visuals are so key for that, even with older children.
You get guilty of doing that as kids get older. There's a kite, you have it, picture of it, it's labeled, all of the different things. And then as you get older, it's just the words.
Yeah.
You kind of expect kids to know it because of their age. Yeah. Technology,
Yeah.
how is that impacting, would you say? Positive impact, negative impacts?
I think it's really tricky. I mean, for me, in my profession, technology's been is quite helpful in terms of knowing more about speech and language from my research, understanding better. I think in terms of screen time, I guess is a big question, isn't it? I feel like it's hard to say because it's just not enough research on it, and it's not longitudinal either. It's just really hard to know the impacts, and even now, we still don't know the impact of screen time, especially since the pandemic. But we know that children's attention is getting worse overall. Generally, I know that my attention is worse when I have TikTok downloaded on my phone. I have it off now because I can just feel my own attention span changing when I'm using screens. I think it's really hard because I use screens when I'm having a day with my godkids because sometimes you need that. I think I'm not going to say you need 1 hour, you need 2 hours of screen time a day, but I think it's thinking about what type of content is it your child's watching and how are you using that? So in speech therapy, we do special time, which is these sort of 15 minutes every day of play that we were talking about before. And one of my parents used the Switch as that special time, and it worked really, really well because she was commenting, she was labeling, expanding all this language using his interest. Now, if he wasn't engaged with much and was super zoned in on that screen, it's not then as effective. While it's thinking, are we using our screen to develop language? I think, again, it's a bit tricky to know also what type of content it is. Is it overstimulating? I think a lot of the things can be really overstimulating for children personally.
And I'm reading The Anxious Generation at the moment, and it's a really interesting book, and it talks about obviously the rise of social media, screen time, smartphones and things like that. And one of the bits I've just got to at the moment is about being alone together. So me and you are playing Switch together, completely engrossed in it, not speaking to each other. And like you said there about the language side of it, there's not parent there developing the language. Kids are just playing it. And that's, I would say, what you want to steer away from.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you do that hours and hours a day, that time, and it talks a lot about unstructured play. So kids just going out in the garden, in the playground, falling over, hurting themselves. But at least then, and having arguments and stuff, you're still talking to someone about it. You're still expressing yourself. So I think, technology is a tricky one.
It's just so accessible.
Yeah.
I saw the other day a baby in a buggy, and it wasn't a forward facing, it was back facing buggy. So a very little baby. And they had a little screen on the buggy, and I was like, "Can you go outside?" Look and talk and, just talk to yourself. Because even those really early, few months are really important for language development as well. So I think,
Even just mimicking,
yeah, exactly.
when I go upstairs, she just bah, 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 bah.
Mhm.
And someone comes in the house and I think we're all crazy because that's what we're all saying. But yeah, it's really about it.
Yeah. But they're always listening and they're always wanting to copy it as well. So I think, again, it's all about that model it. And I think sometimes screens can take away a lot of that. But then again, they can be really helpful. So it's about the balance, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the balance. And I think don't be a saint and say no screens at all, because we have times where we just need 10 minutes to do dinner or something like that. How the TV goes on. But yeah. And social media, that's still kind of the part of technology. Do you think, how's that influencing people at the moment?
I think social media is really tricky. I mean, I think it can be really helpful because I think I have a lot of parents coming in now really knowledgeable about speech and language therapy, and especially about neurodivergence and things like that, which have been really nice, but also there's a lot of misinformation out there. I have if I'm, supporting with the diagnosis or I'm having that conversation with parents, especially things like autism, I have a document ready to give parents of things online that I recommend, which has great information on it, because it's a bit of a minefield and there's a lot of incorrect information out there. So I think it's really tricky.
And that incorrect information can lead to parents kind of misdiagnosing their own kids in a way.
Yeah. And I think as well, there's a lot of therapy out there as well that's not regulated. And I think they are looking for parents who are very anxious and very well needing.
Yeah.
And it's not evidence-based therapy. So I think it can be really tricky.
They will just be doing it literally just to make money, not because of that. Or how do you mean not?
I don't know. Like, they had a family when I was working in the UK. There was a family in our service I know went to America for stem cell therapy for autism, and I think that's there's no evidence for that. It's on the nice UK guidelines that you shouldn't be doing those sort of things. So I think you know it's really tricky. I mean, maybe they have some evidence for it. Is it evidence that's backed appropriately and things like that is really, really tricky. So I think going to professionals who are licensed, who have DHA, HCPC, work with the RCSLT, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy, to know that what sort of information you're getting is the right one. And it always changes, we always update. But yeah, it can be really difficult, which is why I shoot paper and say to parents, just be careful.
It must be so difficult knowing that you just want to help your kid.
Of course, yeah.
So you would literally do anything you can to help your kid. And if that's the first person you come across and they seem trustworthy, then why would they not be telling you the truth?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think, definitely go to credible sources.
Yeah, I think as well, it's always well-meaning as well. So I think, it's really tricky.
Yeah. And if somebody wanted to work with you, how would they go about doing that?
So contacting ATIC, we're a psychology and early development centre.
Yeah.
So contacting ATIC and getting in contact with us, really.
So in your sessions, you see a kid once a week. What are some of the things you'd notice if they're making good progress, or they kind of you need to change the pathway or change what you're doing with them?
So a really nice way, I think, if it's articulation, making a struggle with their S sound or their K or G sound, those are really tangible progress. You can see they can now make the sounds, they can put it into single words, and then they slowly generalize it out into their everyday. That sort of therapy always needs drilling. So you can always tell if they've been doing the homework or not. A lot of the time children will tell me if they've done their homework or not. So that's really nice to see that progress. And then if you're not seeing progress sort of every few weeks, then I would think about changing my approach, maybe changing the cues that I'm giving the child. Maybe they're not quite ready for the level that I'm sort of pitching it at. Maybe they need a different approach. And I think even for especially for the little ones, hopefully in the first month or two, you should be seeing progress. Not necessarily with language, but even maybe with their understanding, maybe with more engagement. They have more engagement with you. They're coming up to you a little bit more to fool you to what they want, or maybe they're using more words, especially for those language ones where they're maybe not talking. I would hope to see progress within, it's really tricky to say, but 3 to 6 months. I'm not necessarily saying that those something start talking, some children don't talk, and that's okay. But in terms of working towards their targets, I'm sort of checking in with those targets every at least 3 months. And I make sure the targets are things like can consistently request that they need to go to the toilet or something like that.
Yeah.
To make it really functional and really successful for them. So yeah. And I think for those older children, I always ask them what they want to work on, and then they can tell me.
Do you work with kids with tics? Like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is so interesting because I hadn't really heard about tics until I came to Dubai.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, maybe I had just not come across it working in the UK.
I'd similar to you, I'd never. And then there was a kid in my class probably about 8-9 years ago, and I didn't notice it. And his mum came up to me and said, we're really working on his tic at the moment. And then you listen out to it, and he made this kind of like a whistle, really loud humming noise. And his mum said, if
he knows if he just kind of rubs his shoulder like that, he stops doing it. And then you obviously, like, you notice it all the time after that. But he was so good at self-regulating himself. Do you do anything like similar to that or work with tics?
I think it's because to me tics are part of like Tourette's,
Yeah.
which is where it's like an involuntary movement or sound or something. I don't know if sometimes they use the word tics here instead of in the UK we say stimming.
Okay.
So that's more like using sensory movements or sounds to regulate themselves, to help keep them focused. To me, they're like kind of two different things in my mind. So I think establishing what is happening, why is it happening? But for stimming, a lot of the time, children, if they're stimming, it might be because they're dysregulated.
Yeah.
So changing their environment to support them to feel regulated, feel happy. And then sometimes stimming is because they're happy and they're regulated, and it's that expression as well. And it's not something that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
So I think it depends.
Yeah, it's just part of who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Chloe Smith, thank you so much for coming on School Talk. Really appreciate it. Really interesting conversation. Yeah. As always, if you find this episode useful or you think someone might learn from it, share it with them and we'll continue to grow. This has been School Talk. My name's Chris Shrubsole. Bye for now.